All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're here for the artist writers relationship panel. Um, Getting all the tips and tricks from the pros on how to have a good relationship with your artists and your writers. I think that's uh, the best part about creating comics, I think, is the collaborative nature. And you always want to keep that going well and stay strong, especially when you find a good team. So this is a super important, very awesome panel to have. Quick few notes, negative space things. Keep an eye out. In the next week, we will be announcing our next upcoming competitions. I don't know the exact date next week, but just keep an eye out. If you're already signed up for our newsletter, you'll get a newsletter announcing our next competition and a few other things we have planned for the rest of the year. And to just jump right in, let's introduce our panelists today. First, we have Andre Frattino. With over a decade of published materials and 2 decades of professional storytelling, Andre Frattino has positioned himself as the historical graphic novelist, focusing on history and folklore as his mainstay narratives. His works include Image Comics' Simon Says, Boom Studios' The Storytellers Shapeshifters, and the upcoming Tokyo Rose 0 Hour due out in September through Tuttle Publishing. Welcome, Andre. It's good to have you. And obviously, we will mention also Andre was a mentor on our fall 2021 first ever competition. Awesome. Thanks for being here. Next, we got Fernando Pinto. Fernando is from Chile and has loved comics forever. Since 2004, Fernando has worked on comics for Image Comics, Webtoons, Mirage Comics, Boom, Archaea, and more. He created, wrote, and drew the books Warped, Gun Punch, and Sam's Big Chance. Fernando also teaches illustration in Santiago, Chile, bringing up a new generation of artists. You can read Gun Punch and learn more about Fernando at minombreesfernandopinto.com. Welcome, Fernando. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And then Fernando was also a judge on our first ever competition. So happy to still have you around and doing things with us. And last up, we have Justin Zimmerman. Justin Zimmerman, MFA in film, is a nationally recognized comic writer, director, and professor. He has been the recipient of multiple grants and fellowships. He contributed a story to the Eisner Award-winning graphic novel Love is Love, and his script and comic work has been optioned on multiple occasions. You can see his work at his website, breakerdown.com. And if y'all can't remember the names of the websites, you can find all their information on our website, which is, if you've got here, you know where our website is, where their bios and their links can be found, as well as their social media stuff. Thank you, Justin, for being here as well. Awesome. So let's just jump right in, start learning about the artist-writer relationship. I'll start up with Andre first, with what I think is probably the hardest question I wrote. So we're just going to start up with a bang, which is you're an artist and a writer, so you kind of know both roles. So I'd love to ask you where you think the balance is of writing too much for an artist to interpret versus leaving too much out for an artist to figure out.
Yeah, well, I think, when it comes to being an artist and being a writer, it all comes down to ownership. And I think that when you are writing for a comic that you're working with an artist, you're acknowledging the fact that maybe your art style isn't where this book is going to flourish. So when I worked on Simon Says, I realized that my style was very cartoonish. It was very, Betty and Veronica, Archie comics, kind of, fun, which didn't play well for a Holocaust story. So, I had the luck of being able to find an artist, Jesse Lee, and be able to write a lot of it with his style in mind. I worked with an artist before him that was very similar, so it wasn't too much of a stretch of where my mind was going with it. But while writing it, I knew that I had to provide enough of my material to be able to narratively tell it where I wanted it to go, but at the same time relying on the fact that because I knew it wasn't my art style, I needed to allow another artist who I trusted to really navigate the waters. And so, Jess did a great job of that, and he really took the project. And I love that about writing and illustrating or working with artists. The collaborative nature of that is really where you have to kind of let go and just let it develop beyond even what your expectations are. And I've had that fortune with so many artists to be able to work with them and just kind of, have a trusting relationship that they can, take what my story is and then make it even better, amplify it. So you have to kind of prepare even ahead of time to allow that to occur. And I think as a strong writer, you acknowledge where you're going to allow, maybe not allow is the wrong word because it's a partnership, but where you want to see that flourishing take place.
Very interesting. And it's interesting. I think about like it's obvious to be able to tell like different art styles because it's a visual, you can see the differences. Do you find yourself writing differently for different artists?
I don't think that. So much of what I've put out so far has really been a lot of my own work, where it's been writing and illustrating. Only with my most recent material with like Simon Says and Tokyo Rose and Storyteller have I really started to do where I'm focusing on the writing and allowing an artist to take it on. And I guess I've never really thought about, does my style change with that? But I think that my style, I think where I'm actually changing my writing is just being maybe a little bit more visually detailed in what I write, only because it's not me doing the artwork. So it's not my mind being able to say, in the moment, I know I'm going to write and I'm going to illustrate it and draw it that way. Most of the time when I'm doing my own projects, I do more of a rough outline than I do a script. And the script comes in later after I've done the visuals, because I know where I want it to all play out and I can make those fixes as I go along. But with artists, I've been lucky. I've had really phenomenal talent that has really been able to take the cues that I set out and illustrate it to exactly what I've wanted it to be.
Very cool. Let's see, Fernando, how do you like to be invited into a project? Is it something that's more like straight transactional, or do you like to have more input with the writer when you're looking at their scripts?
I mean, the best case scenario is you get to work with a writer that first knows your work, knows the kind of stuff that you usually do, and they're open to your input, and that changes from writer to writer. Some writers are very protective of what they do, which is fine, and other writers are more collaborative because they want you to help them figure out how the project's gonna flow or look or whatever. And I can work with both. Personally, I like to have a little bit of input, maybe not so much. If I'm working with a writer, I'm gonna have read the script. I'm gonna be like, okay, I want to draw this, which you spend a lot more time with the pages than the writers, right? I'm not saying one job is easier than the other, because it's not, but you do get to spend more time with the story than the writer does a lot of the time. So I like to have the most input I like to have is on the pacing. A lot of writers tend to do like, okay, this page is this panel and everything. I like to have a little bit of input on that. So narratively, I can feel it more as my project as well. That also depends on if it's like something we're co-creating or if it's just work for hire. Usually, in my case, when it's just work for hire, I'm like, all right, you're paying. Like, I'll just do whatever you need, and I'm good with that. But some writers will just give you a script and you just draw it, and that's fine. Others will ask you. I prefer to be more of a part of the creative process, especially on the narrative side. But I can work either way. Like I've worked with enough writers at this point that I can usually handle any sort of script, thankfully, so far.
Yeah. Have you ever had to say no to a writer because you can tell they were a little too controlling of what they wanted on the page?
I mean, at some point I'll ask if I draw something, I sometimes like you'll do layouts, they'll say okay, and then when you turn into finished pages, they're like, well, I didn't envision it like that, stuff like that, and it's kind of a hassle because then you're working twice. But sometimes I'll ask for like literal reference, like what are you seeing in your head? Like even give me like a chicken scratch drawing, and that can help me out, and I'm good with that. That's fine, but it's good. The only time that would be a problem if a writer says they're very open to collaboration and then get really controlling about it. But that's usually what happens with like newer writers. Like if like the first time or second time, they'll be way more protective of it. But once you get to work with a writer that's worked with a bunch of artists, they usually are open to some flexibility. At least in my experience.
Yeah, I feel like I always, whenever I'm like writing too much in my scripts, I always like to add a little note being like, but you're the artist, you're the professional. Please tell me if I'm being ridiculous as the writer.
I mean, I don't think like writing a lot is wrong. It's just that sometimes like, okay, but maybe this will work better, especially like I've drawn more pages than most writers. Like maybe you've written more, but I've drawn more pages. So I kind of know like maybe that's not going to work the way you're thinking. So I can suggest something. And most people are open to suggestions. I've gotten to a couple places where like, no, I want it like that. So I'm like, all right. And that makes the job less enjoyable, but
Yeah. I actually forgot to completely mention for everyone that is here watching right now, please write in questions. I'm going to be asking our panelists, our great panelists, a few questions here. But if you have anything you want to ask them about how to work with an artist or whatever it might be, you can throw it into the chat, or you can throw it into the Q&A feature that's down in the little bar at the bottom, which I think should be there. Yeah, I see it. So if you have any questions, throw it into the chat, throw it into the Q&A, and we'll get to some of those shortly. Awesome. So Justin, as a writer, I'd love to hear from you. What does the back and forth of notes, feedbacks, or drafts look like when working with an artist?
Well, I think that's actually even one step past where I'd like to start. I think when you start a project with a writer, regardless of whether or not it's work for hire or co-created, you need to have an understanding about roles and responsibilities. So contract. And I think a lot of people don't think about a contract as my friend, or we're just doing this for fun. But a contract really sets out expectations. And so much of this is a relationship of expectations. It's good to have a common idea what needs to be done when, because an artist is going to spend so much more time sitting in front of their computer and in front of paper. Is there some kind of money involved? Even a co-created project can get a little tricky. If I've done in 15 years of comics, I've every single one of my projects is completely mine except for 2. The first was co-created, but the artist actually has copyright of the art, and I have copyright of the script. The project that I'm working on now with Ethan, who you're going to be talking to me about a little bit later, is my only co-created project I've ever worked on where it is 100% split between the two of us evenly. So even a co-created project can have different accountability, roles, responsibilities, etc. Once you figure out that kind of thing, especially with work for hire, like you're having somebody go through this process of a page, then I'm pretty linear, and it comes from my film and teaching background in terms of benchmarks. So, the script is the script approved by both of us. And of course the editor and anybody else, but then do I do thumbs to help them out? Do they do thumbs? Do those get approved? Then we move to pencils, and we move to inks, and move to colors, and move to letters, and you can edit the lettering again. But each one of those is a series of steps that you have a certain number of people who approve as you move on. Even if it's just 2 people and it's a partnership, you say, okay, we're moving on, we're moving on, we're moving on. The contract's really helpful because if you're an artist and you sign up to work with a writer and they approve everything, and then you turn it in, and then they're like, well, I don't really like it so much anymore. In your contract, you have a revision clause that says, oh, well, then I get $50 an hour to do your next round of stuff. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that when this is a relationship of hopefully equals, where everybody is their time and their energy is taken into account. And from the very beginning, you set the standard moving forward. And then because you are linear about the process, then you have a certain number of checkpoints along the way where everybody can agree that the project or the page or whatnot is moving forward. And that just makes everything so much more simple, fluid, and hopefully fun. Because in this industry, if you're not having fun making comics, like, find something else to do.
That's so right. And it's a great point. I feel like I've had contracts that ultimately have a deadline, but they won't break down those benchmarks. And I think those are so important. So we'll get a little bit into contract stuff. Actually, we'll just ask the question now since we're talking about it. What other things are necessary within that contract? Whether it's benchmarks, if it's obviously page rates, if it's deadlines, schedules, what else do you think is important to keep in there to help the relationship, or how you put it, expectations for the roles work a little better? And this is for Justin or anyone that wants to jump in.
Oh yeah, just let's hear some other voices.
Yeah,
I think nowadays more than ever, it's media rights. I think that we see comic books and television shows and movies playing such an intricate part. And we've even seen some comic book publishers be built on the notion that they are transforming scripts into comic format to trial television and movies. And so, you have to think if, it would be very naive if you just got into comics and signed a contract to be like, oh, well, we're just going to make this a book, and then we'll worry about the TV show and film rights when and if that happens. I think now you've got to be prepared for anything, especially with publishers that, want to take your work and have whole divisions that will, shop you around to Hollywood. You need to figure that out at a very early point in the project, because, nothing will hurt the morale of you and your artist or you and your writer if you guys are relying on each other's loyalty to each other to be like, oh, we'll handle this when and if this becomes a TV show or film deal. Hollywood has a rough reputation of changing that, and it can really easily, affect how that is. And I'm not saying that from personal experience. I'm just saying that, look at any of the other projects that have gone into film and television, and then go look at the artist, writer, creative relationships post the movie rights. They're not necessarily a great track record. So I think you really want to divvy that out and figure out, all right, what are we going to do the rights for television? What are we going to do the rights for characters, toy rights, how much is the percentage breakdown? If we make this into a movie, obviously they're going to use my script, but your artwork is maybe going to play a part of that, but does it play 50-50? Does it play 70-30? And you've got to be, it's not going to be necessarily a great conversation, but, you need to break that bread and figure out, hey, where are we aligning? I think that's one of the most pivotal ones in, modern comic collaboration.
Yeah, and shout out to Teddy. What's up, Teddy, in the chat? He also jumped in talking about audiovisual rights, themed entertainment rights, merchandising rights, all being very super important for a team to get nailed down early on. Thanks, Teddy. Cool. Thank you for that. I feel like those were super helpful. I don't know if you have any more input on that, Fernando. Contracts, it's just making sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just take that last part of what Andre says. Like, it's not the greatest conversation a lot of times, but it's definitely a necessary one. And get a lawyer to look over your stuff. That's usually, like, it took me a couple trials to understand that. but yeah, dude, like, nobody likes lawyers. I'm sorry if there's any lawyers watching, but they're very, very necessary. Like, even like to read your contracts, and like, you may think you understand them, but a lot of the times you don't. So to get someone that knows the lingo to look over your stuff. I
like my entertainment lawyer very much, and he is a comic book fan and he's really great at his job. I'm a much smaller client than his normal folks, but he likes the industry very much. And I've learned so much from the process of working with him on contracts across the board. and they don't have to be negative, because a lot of people, they hear a contractor, a lawyer, and they go, oh, this is now it's serious. We're just talking about comics here. But no, you're talking about time and energy. And as Andre, alluded to, best case scenario is something magical happens with your project. So why not be prepared? But again, it also really helps out the day-to-day structure of your life with your project, because you don't want to be, like Fernando was saying, turn in an inked page and have the writer go, oh, it's just not good enough. I mean, that's a day, 2 days of work just gone. Well, if that stuff is baked in, the process is baked in, that hopefully will never happen. And if it does, then, you get paid again. And so maybe that doesn't hurt as bad or sting so much. But yeah, an entertainment lawyer, making sure everything's on the up and up. And don't ever forget that once you are done with any stage of your process, script, and certainly when the art comes in, to register it at loc.gov and make sure that you've got copyright protection, because that stands forever. And if you want to see a horrifying case of that not standing, just Google George Romero and Night of the Living Dead, and you will never forget it again.
Great input. Thank you. All right, getting back to Andre. We talked a little bit about you being an artist and a writer, you knowing both roles so well. So how do you go into a project differently, in the sense that does the artist expect you to have some prep work done, or is it still just working straight off scripts? Do you like doing the thumbnails off your scripts before it gets to an artist? Is there anything different there in the process?
When it's come to actually doing, like, I love thumbnails, but I do it for myself. For my projects, I thumbnail out. That really helps me. I've never had the thumbnail for another artist. Now, I have in instances, like if I've had to explain something that we're just not getting, word to word, or something that I want to see that's hard to explain but easier to visualize, I'll show that. So for example, when we did Simon Says, Jess made that beautiful upward shot of the train car with the Simon Says swastika on it, and the footsteps walking away. Well, like, that was something that was hard for me to kind of verbally explain the visual I was looking for. So it was easier for me to just jump on page and be like, this is what I want it to look like. And he instantly got it, and he just took it from there. Same way with the storyteller, I didn't need to provide them any visuals, but working with my editor, I shared some a character lineup that I actually illustrated of the 4 family members, the 4 children, the children of Lear. And, it was fun to see that my visual character ideas of them translated with Nori Rutherford's artwork. So she really took it and was like, hey, this is good, and built on that. So it's fun to see those elements come into play, but, that's really the artist's role. I can write the script, but to also do the layouts feels a little bit like I'm shortchanging what I'm expecting them to be able to do. And it's also like it's like too many cooks in the kitchen, if I can verbally write it out in the script so that they can understand where I'm going with it, it should also be their role to be able to take that and do it on their own. I shouldn't have to go in there and handhold them through the process with it.
And it's gotta be a nice surprise that they end up doing something you weren't expecting off your script, or something you would have done yourself one way and they do it a different way. I'm sure it's gotta be cool to see.
It's equally cool to see something where you're like, that's exactly what I wanted, and it couldn't have been any better than what you did. So, but that's the joy of collaboration. I think that's the truest form of comic book storytelling, is when, of course, you're creating this visual narrative to share with the masses, but when you can share your story with another artist and then together develop something that's just so, pure of 2 imaginations, the marriage and the development of that is just that's pure artwork. So
I love it. So Fernando, like we mentioned before, you're in Chile. What should American-based writers know about working with an artist from another country, or that's currently living in another country, thinking about timelines, payments, language barriers, anything like that?
Well, like my first instinct to answer that is like any artist from any country is usually gonna be pretty much the same, and like any barriers that you're gonna land on are gonna be maybe language barriers, like so that depends. But like nowadays, I don't think that's much of an excuse, because even if you don't speak the language at all, you still have Google Translate, and you can get some sort of translation of an email that you didn't get, you know. So I don't see that much as a factor. I mean, you can think about like time zones, and like if we're gonna have a Zoom call, like think that I'm in a different time zone, which is like very basic stuff. But I think like any artist, just like, and the same goes with writers, and the responsibility that an artist has with the writers, like just respect each other as creators. You know what I mean? Like, be honest, be honest about what you expect, what you need, and what your responsibilities are in the project. Same with the artist, right? Don't promise stuff that you can't that you can't actually go through with, because I've had projects where I've been offered stuff and then it doesn't come to fruition, and that just kills maybe a really good working relationship. Aside from that, I just think maybe like if you're gonna work with an artist from a different country, what I would say, maybe like look at your script and look at adjectives and be as precise as you want with those, as you can with those. Sorry, but like if you tell me you need a giant monster, maybe something that's giant to me is not what's giant to you. A giant could be like 12 feet tall or 100 feet tall. You know what I mean? Like really dumb stuff like that can really slow down a process if you don't figure it out. So, but like I said, like even with language barriers, it's more like I don't like those kind of problems you can find with an artist that you have the same language with. You know, just like try to be
Right.
as specific as you can with the stuff that you really need in the script, and be as open as you can with the stuff that you can collaborate in. That's what I would say.
Awesome. All right, and I want to talk to Justin a little bit about artist-writer relationship that has worked for a while now. You've been working with Ethan on a handful of books, and I believe a few more that are coming up. What has made that relationship so successful and last?
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking about that, because Ethan's not even the artist I've worked with longest. And in the film world, so I got my film degree, my master's about 20 some years ago. And there are people in the film world that I've worked with consistently on projects for 15, 16, 17 years. So I think that's hopefully something that you build not just in a singular realm in your life, but hopefully across the board. And when I look for collaborators, I look for those kind of people who have a good reputation and who are communicative and straightforward, who are excited about a project, but also confident enough in themselves to be honest about what they can deliver and when. All these very basic things that we're talking about, but that can gum up so many relationships, especially creative ones, because a lot of this stuff, you don't always, it's not like you just have a group of people and you pick them out of the stars. A lot of comics come out of convenience and relationships and from what's kind of evolving in front of you in real time. Film's very similar in that. So if you are going to make something and you are going to have a certain amount of time, energy, and hopefully budget to do it, who are you going to work with? Somebody who you've worked with before and who you can see bringing something to life, who's got a really great reputation, even if you haven't worked with them before, or just some random kind of person who has dropped deadlines, been cruel to other people, and is not even, you wouldn't sit down and have a meal with, let alone work on a project with for a year. So to me, I think, Ethan, I can't say enough great things about him. I worked with him on he storyboarded a film for me, and then I brought him into the comic book world through an anthology, and I had to fight for him, which was funny because after the project was done, a bunch of people wanted to work with him. And then I was fortunate enough to continue working with him. And then because of that relationship, and again, a big step for both of us is that we are working on a co-created book from the ground up. We've put a year and a half into it already, and I think people have seen one page. So you try to find people, I guess what I'm trying to say is you try to find people that you could see yourself being friends with, like, because the creative relationship, ultimately speaking, should be, and I keep saying this, should be a partnership, should be a collaboration of equals. And if you can go into a project with that as a starting point, then you know it's going to be fun, successful, and interesting, regardless of what literally anybody else thinks about it. And then hopefully people will see that love and passion and respect into that project, and then it'll come through on each and every page. And that's what you're hoping for. Trust me, I've had other things gone the other way, but we'll just concentrate on the positive right now.
That seems to be the go-to advice from a lot of people I talk to, and I definitely have said it myself a million times. If they're good people and they meet deadlines, you're gold. But I liked your example. If you sit down and have a meal with them, and it's really telling, because if you can't have a meal with them, you don't want to sit with them for 8 months, 12 months working on a project. Cool. We're gonna jump into a question. We have 2, 3 here so far. We'll go with the first one that came through from Teodoro Leo. How can editors help enhance the writer-artist relationship, and how do editors hurt the artist-writer relationship? Whoever wants to chime in on that one.
I'm doing that right now, so I'll just say real quickly, I've been working on a graphic novel with a novelist who's never written for a comic book before, and it's a full-fledged graphic novel. So helping them translate their kind of giant flowery prose into action and dialogue, nothing else as specific as possible, has been really helpful for the artist. For the artist, understanding that it's going to be a little bit of a different process translating those words back into a visual realm, that this individual is not going to be as specific as you would want someone to be. And so that's going to be another layer of intricacy, but trying to break down those separate communication styles into one central document that moves back and forth has really been the key. I think editors really need to be there to foster that relationship that we were talking about as much as possible.
Yeah,
I mean, working with my editors, I would say most recently, it's the job of the editor to really, just to kind of essentially amplify again what, sorry, I'm like dropping out here for a second. For what Justin had said for a moment ago, is that it is the editor's responsibility to kind of amplify the artist and the writer's talents, but also to rein it in as well. Because when you allow a writer and artist to kind of go off on a tangent, they might not be creating terrible work, but they're not necessarily going to stay on target all the time. So it's almost like being like, kind of being like the mother hen to a degree, or maybe being like the dorm mom. Like, they have your best interests in mind. They just want to make sure that you're keeping focused in the right way. So, my experience with editors has been almost entirely fantastic. And I've never had a bad editor. But I wouldn't really know what a bad editor would look like, because if that's the case, they probably shouldn't be an editor to begin with. So yeah.
I would only like to add that it's good to have an editor, because then the ownership of the project is not just on the one person, and you get someone to, like, as Andre said, like, rein everybody in. I've worked in indie projects where the writer is the one that's moving the project, and the writer becomes the de facto editor. So that puts the artist in a position where it can be a weird position to be in, because at the end of the day, you're just doing what the writer wants.
It's like you're collaborating, but you also have your collaborator as your boss in some way.
Exactly.
Or
right.
It's a weird,
and collaboration.
weird connection.
Yeah. It can be like, it's not the case with all writers that I've done that with, but it can happen. So having that third person, having that third voice that's impartial as can be, and can call you on your crap, or like encourage you when you're doing something right, that could be like a key a key element to like make the project even more than what it could originally have been. So yeah, it's good to have an editor like that, and it's awesome when they answer your emails as well.
I think oftentimes editors are kind of the unsung hero of the group, and that's not to say that that's trivializing their title, but you hear about like people who read comic books and they're like, oh my God, I love the books that come out through such and such writer or such and such artist. But the editor is the person in there that's really making it so that you would enjoy it. I mean, I've written stuff where I've had editors go, you might want to fix this. And you go, you're right. And it makes it so much of a better, stronger story. Likewise, I've had editors go, this art piece isn't translating the right way. And that's made it stronger as well. So I feel like editors need to get a little bit more of the, and this isn't to kiss up to the editors, but I mean, they definitely need to be getting a little bit more praise for the work they're doing, I think publicly, more so than they are. So, because sometimes it's hard to look on a comic book or a graphic novel and be like, okay, who edited this book? Who was the editor on it? Sometimes they're a really tiny print on the very back last page.
And I think a lot of what we've been talking about, at least as far as my point of view, is projects that are more independent or more creator driven. If you're working for a big company and they're like, turn the script in, and then you never see the art until it's printed somewhere, that's a completely different relationship with an artist than, I would like to know you 20 years from now and I'll be at your wedding. But when you're building something together from the ground up, those relationships are key. And then an editor can help preserve those, because then nobody has to be the person who's like, where's that page? Or why isn't this as good? Or where's this check or whatnot? That person can not only be impartial, but they can be the driver when it comes to more of the scheduling or the process. And then the writer and the artist, or whatever the mix is there, can concentrate on doing what they do best, which is making something cool together.
That's awesome. So I hope Teddy is feeling the love off that question. Editors are important, number one priority. All right, so next question I see in the chat here from Laura. From script to final art, have the number of pages ever changed dramatically? Like the art needed more space than the writer allowed for, or the writer wrote redundant panels for the artist could draw in fewer panels?
Yes.
What's been like a dramatic example, I guess?
I was with a project at first where the script wasn't finished, and then the script had more pages at the end. So that allowed for a little bit more of, when you get to the climax, you get to do like more splash pages and have the narrative, the visual narrative of it, like be enriched by that. So that could be a cool thing. At the same time, there's been times when I've turned in layouts and the writer would be like, oh, well, maybe like we do this, make this bigger, and we'll take off these two panels or anything. So when you have a good relationship with a writer, like it can, like that change doesn't need to be a negative one. The only downside I would see of that, if the financials are not there and like, oh, we need 10 more pages, but there's no more money, like that, yeah, that sucks. That's the only downside I could see that. But if you can make a project grow or shrink or have a section be longer or whatever, if it helps the narrative, like I think that's a great thing. You have that liberty. That's from my experience, at least.
Yeah, I think I've said this before in other in podcasts and other panels that the storyteller was such a new experience for me, because I had to create. It was my first IP project I've ever worked on. So having to handle the reins of working on somebody else's property like Jim Henson. But it was also so important because it taught me to have to create more in a lesser space. Because until that point, my graphic novels ranged anywhere from 120 to 160 to, A Land Remembered was almost 300 pages long. So, to that was just like, you have the ropes, you can do whatever you want, but it was a restraint in pages for the storyteller. 22 pages was the max. And so working with both the editor and with the artist, I had to learn to relinquish that sense that or not relinquish, but learn to allow more art to direct the story, and take out some of those words. So my initial script called for many more pages than that 22. And I had to keep shrinking it and learning, all right, where is it that I can allow the art to breathe and tell the story and rely less on the dialogue and, that discussion, that part of it. So, yeah, I think that it can wildly change to answer the question, but I definitely see it as more in the benefit of the artist than it is for the writer. You're going to have to take a little less writing and allow the visuals to stand in for it more.
Well, and I was going to say too, don't forget that most people's entry to the comic book world are through anthologies, and anthologies, if you get 8 pages, you're in great shape. So you really do need to think about, not as much as possible, in the publishing world, not getting the grand freedom that we all have come to enjoy in our kind of independent or personal work, really honing in on the writer-artist relationship, truly creating something great in 2 pages, 4 pages, 8 pages at the most. Not a bad thing to kind of keep in mind, for sure. And then when you sign those contracts, make sure that the number of pages that you're being paid for are part of the contracts, not just an issue or 2 issues, is I think something that Fernando just alluded to, which is another good thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Not only the number of revisions, but what are you actually delivering should be part of that initial contract and that initial idea. But that process of thumbs to pencils to inks, it's not just process or benchmark or file management. It's also, okay, so I do want to give this scene a little bit more time. I do really want to think about the storytelling nature of this. I think my last script was 4 pages longer after the thumbs, because we found out that there were spaces where characters needed to express themselves, and the script didn't even change that much. We just gave the artist the room to really move. And that's the best part of all this stuff. Once you have a structure and a relationship and an understanding, then you get to grow this thing, and it can take all kinds of turns once that's established.
Awesome. So let's see, this is kind of a 2-parter in the Q&A. We'll have, from the writer's perspective, what's one thing you wish artists knew about your job that would help foster a better relationship? And the second part is from the artist's perspective, what's one thing you wish the writers knew about your job that would help foster a better relationship? We can start with the artist's perspective. So what do you think? What do you wish writers knew about your job that you think will help the relationship?
I think, wow. Well, I think most writers know what it entails to draw a comic. At least because we all know the medium, and we watch and we learn and we ask. But take that, how would I say it? I think most writers know how much longer it takes to draw a page than to write a page, right? And that not all pages take the same amount of time. For example, like if a writer asks me, like, how many pages can you do a week? I can tell you, okay, it's around 4, but it depends on the pages you give me. If you give me a 7-panel page on each page, and every single one of those pages has a crowd scene in it, like, it's probably going to take a little while longer to get done, right? So, and I think sometimes that could be a little confusing. Maybe not confusing, but taking that into consideration, like, not all pages are built the same, right? And if you have like 2 characters talking for 4 pages, I can maybe get that done in 2 days, and that's fine. But then the next scene is going to be this huge battle with starships and whatever, and that page, that splash page, might take me 2-3 days to draw. So that sort of difference, that's like the main takeaway, I would say. I think most writers are aware of that, but sometimes they're not aware enough, if that makes any sense. That's what I would say.
It definitely does. I feel like I had that exercise, and I draw a bit. I'm not going to call myself an artist in any way, but I draw a few of my pages. But I remember in a class once years ago, they were making sure that for an exercise, the writers tried to draw a page that they scripted, just so they can actually feel what it's like to draw a full page with a bunch of panels on it and how long it takes them. And it was eye-opening for a lot of people.
Definitely, yeah.
I'm going to say that, having done both artists and writers, this is something I actually thought a lot about when we were coming on today, was that, I think there's the misconception, I think there's a stigma even within the comic community that, a writer's going to spend maybe 2-3 months writing their script. And then the artist is going to spend another 6-7 months maybe really crafting and visualizing the artwork. At least with the people I've worked with, that's been the case. Some artists are faster, some can get things done quickly, some take more time, depends on the scope of the project. But, whatever that case is going to be, the artist is going to spend more physical hours with the project on the visualization side. So I think sometimes as an artist, you can become frustrated when you're like, well, the writer only spent 2 months, or a month, like, get off my back. But I think what's important for the artist to remember is that if the writer's the one that approached you with it, or if it's the writer's story and publisher, the editor picked you as the artist, you're coming in, yes, as a partnership, but you're also coming in with somebody who might have just a little bit more of a personal thing into that project. And that's not to say that the artist is lesser for it or the artist cares less, but you have to remember that that writer is going to be present through the steps. If they're a good writer and they care about the project, they care about their baby, they want to be there, they want to be present, they want to see the progress. So I think that's where the chafing occurs. And I think that there needs to be a better understanding on both sides of like, look, I'm writing it, but for the next 3 months to kind of validate further, I might manage into it, or I might want to peek in, or I might want to ask questions and push along. But you also have to pull back and make sure that that artist has their breadth, their space, and allowed to be that creative person. But I think that that's one thing that both sides need to really learn is that time frame that we were just talking about. And Fernando, having be taking 3 days to finish a page has to be understandable. But I think, from a writer point of view, that what an artist should know that there is definitely an ownership to a larger extent in some aspects, and that, what you do does reflect what they want to see in the end of it. So.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to those two perfect comments.
Do you have any insight on the writer's perspective, as far as like what you wish the artist knew about the time that you take on a project, or you're good?
No, I mean,
Andre
I think
said it.
again, any partnership, hopefully that's what you're going for is mutual respect and space, but also communication. And so I think
Right.
those two statements were perfect.
Cool. All right, we can start hitting up my extra credit questions I have. Actually, one that I was thinking about that I know we're talking about the artist and the writer relationship a good bit. As the artist, what does it look like working with other artists? Like if you've had a colorist on your project, or even the letterer, what it's like working with them on a project, and what kind of communication is needed there?
It can be great because there's so many talented artists out there, and I've had people that I've collaborated with that have elevated my stuff to insane levels. At the same time, when you get assigned a person that will color your stuff or letter your stuff, that might be a little tricky, sometimes, because it depends on the level of communication you get to have with your collaborators. Like I usually ink everything myself, but when I've worked with a colorist or with a letterer, I want to be able to talk to them. Like if I did layouts and I did balloon placements, I want to send those to the letterer, right? And like, this is how I see it. Like you're the letterer, you know more about lettering than I do, but I think this is how it should flow, right? And then they can be like, oh no, maybe this could, like I think anything that enhances the final product is great, but there should be communication between every single one of the professionals doing this, right? Even if it's through an editor, like we were talking about the importance of editors before, but keeping those channels of communication open, I think is very important. And that way we all have a certain amount of ownership over the final product. Like I don't want to have something published that I'm like, yeah, I kind of like the art, but the color is like screwed it up, because like the light source, I thought it was gonna come from whatever, right? If as long as I'm able to talk to the people that I'm working with, I'm good.
Cool. Any input,
Yeah, I
Andre?
agree with that too.
Yeah.
I mean, I've only worked with artists, and then most recently with Tokyo Rose coming out. We had the opportunity to work with Janice Chang, who is a 40-year veteran in comic book lettering. She's worked with Gene Yang, she's worked with Stan Lee. And so, her approach was, I think you're right, equal communication, but also equal trust. She had been doing so much work for so long that Kate and I could rest easy in knowing that she was only going to augment the project. And her biggest concern was making sure that she wasn't covering up any of Kate's artwork. And so there were actual things that she did in the lettering that, Kate, who had lettered the Kickstarter version beforehand, was like, oh, wow, I didn't even think about approaching it that way. But Janice kept great communication. So she was an example of a third partner in this situation that just came and augmented it further and made it even better and communicated even harder. And it was like finishing the holy trinity, or finishing and rounding out the Three Musketeers with her for this project. So, but I agree with you 100%. I haven't worked with the colorist, but I can only imagine that, man, a good colorist or a bad colorist can just make or break the whole project. And I would like rue the day if I ended up with a terrible colorist, because I just don't know how I would react. So, civilly though, professionally.
Of course. And Justin, to ask you, when you write one of your projects, what goes into the process to choose the right art style, aka the right artist for one of your writing projects?
Yeah, I feel pretty fortunate. Even early on, when I first started working in comics, and I was working on a graphic novel, and it was taking quite a while because I live in the Pacific Northwest and was part of the comic community. I started writing short stories that eventually became an anthology. And what I did was I picked a number of artists that I was excited about working with and actually wrote scripts for them. And I think that was an opportunity that you don't have very often. Sometimes you have to find them for yourselves. And it's possible. I mean, a lot of comic books, I think, come out of, you can write awesome, you can draw great, let's make something cool together. I mean, most of my favorite comic books started with those kind of collaborations. But if you have the opportunity to write for an artist, or write to an artist's strengths, or maybe to push an artist in a new direction, I mean, what a cool thing, because you're always trying to learn and get better, and you're always trying to basically get more tools in your toolkit. So for me, that's a big deal. And you learn by doing. I mean, I don't think anybody learns how to make a film or create a comic book reading a book, as helpful as they can be. So again, anthology stories, short stories, little pieces, finding people to bring your work to life helps you learn kind of what you're looking for in larger term projects, or when you write for different kind of people at different times. And artistic skills, a huge part of that. The look and the feel of the artist's work is a big part of that, but also, again, who's going to be dependable, who's going to be able to work with you down the line.
Awesome. Cool. I think we have a few minutes left. I'm just going to open it up to the three of you to see if you all have any last thoughts you want to just throw in there before we call it a night. Or everything's been said.
I think that as heavy as the subject matter it can be, and we're talking about writer and artist relationships, I think that again, I can't advocate hard enough for just work with each other, communicate with each other. I mean, this is a medium that is rooted so heavily in communication, and it only works when people are reading it. It only works when people are looking at it, drawing it, writing it, and there's so many varying components to it. Only can make it better if done the right way. But rather than being intimidated by it, I think too many people do take it upon themselves to write and illustrate and draw and create, because they're afraid of losing their babies, like, well, this is my baby, this is my swan song, or this is my magnum opus. And it's like, I don't want anybody else to touch it. But I think that, like every relationship, there can be so much more given to it, so much more life put into it if you allow for these experiences to happen. And, as, Fernando had mentioned earlier, just, open communication, keeping that communicated, it will keep you on the straight and narrow and away from making the dramatic and sloppy mistakes of, breaking up like the Beatles for comics. But I think that, just as equally, more communication can help create something beautiful. So that's it. That's me off of my soapbox.
Yeah, I would only like to add, like, making comics is like the coolest thing you can do, in my opinion. It's an awesome medium. You don't need a lot of resources to get them done. A lot of the time, sometimes maybe you need more, but there's so many people that want to make comics, and there's so many writers out there that are itching. Every writer that I've met has more ideas than they have time to do. Even if they're a writer artist, like, they have a ton of ideas. If you're an artist looking to collaborate, go to a convention, go with your portfolio, and like, you can go to editors and that's great, and maybe you'll get a gig or whatever. Go to writers. Writers are always looking for artists. And if they don't have a project for you right now, they might have one down the line. Open those lines of communications. Talk to writers. They have a ton of ideas, a lot of them. And a lot of them they write better than you are. Even if you're a writer artist, a lot of the times you can find like even a cooler story to draw. So if you're looking to break into comics, meet writers. That's what I would say.
And make sure that you're having fun. I mean, the negative would be look at cost benefit analysis or pick your battles. Like, no one's going to care about this stuff more than you will. Most people, you're going to spend years of your life on something somebody reads in 35 minutes at the most. So just think about, in context, this really needs to be about you and fun and bringing something to life and working with people and learning and growing on the more positive side. I'd also say finish what you start. Regardless of whether or not you're a writer and an artist working together on a short piece or a long piece, part of the reason you figure all that stuff out, that contract stuff and that schedule stuff at the beginning, is so you can finish it together. And that's how you grow, and you do your next piece and you see how people react to your work. You don't, there's no art without a response. There's no art without an audience. Not really. So don't forget that you're making something together, finish it together, support it together, and then get ready to do the next thing.
Amazing. Thank you, three, for being here. Really appreciate your thoughts, your expertise, all of it. So I really appreciate the time, really appreciate all of it. Thank you for everyone that was here watching, and we'll see you at the next one. Awesome. Have a good night, y'all.
Bye, guys.